My mom used to make burnt toast every morning, while my dad complained about bills, and somehow that still felt normal. So, why did they suddenly care so much about my scholarship letter?
The last normal memory I have of my family was a Saturday morning in early summer. I was 13, barefoot on the driveway, helping my dad rinse soap off his old blue sedan, while my mom laughed from the porch, telling us not to waste water we couldn't afford. Our neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it felt like home. Small lawns, cracked sidewalks, people who waved when they passed by. Back then, it was just the three of us in that tiny rental house on Maple Street. Money was always tight, but my parents kept saying things would get better once I got older and started making something of myself. And honestly, I believed them. That same afternoon, I ran inside holding a scholarship letter from school so tightly my hands were shaking. I thought my parents would be proud. But when my dad looked up from the kitchen table, his smile disappeared so fast it scared me. And that night, I heard my parents whispering about me through the bedroom wall.
I still don't understand why my scholarship made the room feel tense instead of happy. Shouldn't parents want that for their kid?
The girl's smart, my mother whispered. If she leaves for that school, the checks stop. I remember sitting upright in bed, staring into the dark like maybe I'd heard wrong. Our walls were thin, and my parents argued all the time about bills. But hearing them talk about me like I was some kind of expense made my stomach knot up. I waited for one of them to say something comforting after that, something normal. But all I heard was my father sigh heavily before saying, "We can't keep drowning like this." The next morning, everything looked ordinary again. My mom made toast before school. My dad asked me if I'd remembered my math binder. The TV played quietly in the living room while sunlight came through the faded curtains. If I hadn't heard that conversation the night before, I probably wouldn't have noticed how forced their smiles looked. I kept trying to convince myself I was imagining things. At school, my guidance counselor pulled me aside to talk about the scholarship interview. She told me students from families like mine rarely got opportunities like this. I should have felt proud. Instead, I kept hearing my mother's voice in my head. The checks stop. When I got home that afternoon, my father's car was gone, but my mother was sitting alone at the kitchen table, smoking cigarettes, even though she'd supposedly quit months earlier. The ashtray beside her was overflowing. She didn't ask about school, didn't ask about the interview. She just stared at the scholarship letter in my hands and said, "That academy's pretty far away, isn't it?" I nodded slowly. "For boarding students," I said. "Most kids live on campus." Something changed in her expression then. Not sadness, not pride either. Relief. It flashed across her face for maybe half a second before disappearing. That scared me more than yelling would have. That night, my father came home in a worse mood than usual. I heard cabinets slamming in the kitchen while I sat at my desk trying to finish homework. Around 9, the power shut off for almost a minute before flickering back on. My dad cursed under his breath. Then someone knocked on the front door. I peeked through my bedroom window and saw a tall, older man standing on our porch in a dark coat. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Leonard Graves, the wealthy property owner who lived across town in one of those giant gated estates everyone in the neighborhood talked about. My father stepped outside to speak with him, shutting the door behind him. I couldn't hear much, just fragments. Late again. Trying to handle it. The girl? A few minutes later, Leonard looked up toward my bedroom window, and for some reason, he looked worried. The next morning, I came home from school and saw my suitcase sitting on the front porch. At 13 years old, I still believed parents were supposed to protect you, even after the whispers, even after the strange looks, even after seeing my suitcase outside the house, some part of me honestly thought there had been a misunderstanding. I dropped my backpack and ran to the front door. It was locked. I knocked once at first, lightly, embarrassed in case the neighbors heard me. Then harder. Then with both fists. "Mom?" No answer. I could hear movement inside the house. The television was on. Somebody was there. "Dad?" My voice cracked. "What's going on?" The curtain near the kitchen window twitched slightly. My mother peeked through it, but she didn't open the door. That's the part I remember most clearly. Not anger, not screaming, just the fact she wouldn't even face me properly. "You're old enough now," she said through the glass. Her voice sounded flat, almost rehearsed. "We can't do this anymore." I stared at her like I didn't understand English. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Where am I supposed to go?" My father appeared behind her for a second, before tossing my school backpack onto the porch so hard papers spilled across the concrete. "You'll figure it out," he muttered. Then he walked away. I started crying after that. Not dramatic movie crying, just confused, shaking tears because none of it made sense. I begged them to open the door. I told them I'd help more around the house. I told them I could get a job after school. My mother wouldn't look at me anymore. A few neighbors had started watching from across the street by then, pretending not to stare. Nobody came over. Nobody stopped it. By sunset, I was sitting beside my suitcase behind a laundromat 3 blocks away, hugging my scholarship letter against my chest because it was the only thing I had left that still felt connected to my future. That's where Leonard Graves found me the next morning. He stood beside the diner parking lot for a long moment before speaking. "Favor," he said carefully. "Why are you sleeping outside?" I wiped my face quickly and lied immediately. "I'm fine." But his eyes dropped to the bruises forming around my wrist, and the expression on his face changed instantly. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "You're not sleeping outside again." I thought Leonard Graves was just being kind. One warm meal, maybe a phone call to social services, maybe a temporary place to stay for the night. I had no idea that stepping into his car that morning would completely divide my life into before and after. His estate sat on the edge of town behind iron gates and long rows of trees. I remember feeling embarrassed walking inside, wearing the same wrinkled clothes I'd slept in for 2 days. Everything looked spotless. Dark wood floors, tall windows, bookshelves bigger than my entire bedroom back home. But the strangest part wasn't the money. It was the quiet. No yelling, no doors slamming, no tension sitting in the walls like smoke. A housekeeper showed me to a guest room with clean blankets folded neatly at the foot of the bed. There was even a desk beside the window. A desk. I actually stood there staring at it because nobody had ever given me space that belonged only to me before. Leonard never treated me like charity. That mattered. He gave me rules, curfews, chores, expectations, and somehow that felt more loving than anything I'd known from my own parents. Over the next few weeks, he started asking careful questions about home. Not aggressively, just enough to notice when my stories stopped making sense. Then, one evening, I overheard him arguing quietly with someone in his office. They were receiving assistance for the girl. The scholarship changes eligibility. They pushed her out before the review. I didn't fully understand it then. I only knew Leonard looked furious afterward. But he never told me the whole truth. Instead, he focused on my future. Years passed faster after that. School became college. College became business training. Leonard taught me everything: property management, contracts, negotiation, responsibility. People who survive betrayal, he told me once, either spend their lives broken or they build something stronger. 15 years later, after Leonard passed away and left me the estate, I was standing in my office reviewing tenant reports when my security monitor chimed. Two figures stood outside the front gate in the rain. Older, exhausted, familiar. I zoomed in slowly, and my entire body went cold. It was my parents. For a second, I couldn't breathe. 15 years disappeared instantly, replaced by the memory of standing outside a locked front door with a suitcase at my feet. My father looked older now, smaller somehow. His shoulders curved inward beneath a soaked brown jacket, and the sharp confidence I remembered was gone. My mother's hair had turned mostly gray, hanging damp against her face as she stood beside him, clutching a worn handbag. They looked exhausted, desperate. And despite everything, part of me still felt that old reflex to open the gate and ask if they were okay. I hated that feeling. My assistant, Claire, noticed my expression immediately. "Do you know them?" I swallowed hard before answering. "Yes." That's enough for me to call security. I should have said yes. Instead, 10 minutes later, I was standing beneath the covered entrance outside the estate while rain hammered against the driveway between us. Neither of my parents spoke at first. Then my mother burst into tears. "Oh, Favor," she whispered. "We've been trying to find you for so long." It sounded rehearsed, too quick, like she'd practiced it in advance. My father didn't even pretend emotionally. He shoved his hands into his pockets and got straight to the point. "We lost the apartment," he said. "Everything's gone." I stared at him silently. "We heard about Leonard leaving you this place," he continued. "And after everything we did raising you, we figured family should help family." Family. The word almost made me laugh. Not one apology, not one question about my life, just need. My mother kept crying while my father explained debts, repossessions, unpaid loans, but the details kept changing. First, they'd been evicted 3 months ago, then 6. My mother claimed they'd searched for me for years, but my father admitted they only found me recently through an old newspaper interview. The lies were colliding with each other. Then headlights swept across the driveway. A black sedan pulled up near the entrance, and my property manager stepped out holding a folder against the rain. He stopped walking the moment he saw my parents. His entire face changed. "You," he said quietly. My father stiffened immediately. The manager looked at me, suddenly uneasy. "Miss Smith, I know these people." A cold feeling spread through my chest. He tightened his grip on the folder. 15 years ago, I handled housing records for Maple Street. His eyes moved back to my parents. I remember them because they tried to surrender custody of their daughter for financial compensation. My mother's face drained of color. "That isn't what happened," she whispered. But the manager slowly opened the folder in his hands, and inside were documents with my name on them. The rain had started soaking through my coat by the time the property manager handed me the papers. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped them. Across the top of the first document was my full name, Favor Smith, age 13. Beneath that were forms connected to a temporary state housing assistance program from 15 years earlier. The manager explained it carefully, almost like he regretted being the one forced to say it out loud. Back then, my parents had been drowning in debt, behind on rent, utilities overdue, collection agencies calling daily. The program would have provided emergency financial relief if they voluntarily surrendered custody of a dependent child. My parents had applied, not because they thought I'd be safer somewhere else, because they needed money. The scholarship complicated everything, the manager said quietly. If Favor left for the academy, certain assistance payments would stop, and the custody process would be reviewed differently. I looked up slowly. That was why my father had asked if the scholarship included housing. That was why my mother looked relieved. They hadn't been worried about losing me. They'd been worried about losing the checks attached to me. The realization hit harder than being thrown out ever had, because for 15 years, some small part of me still believed desperation had made them panic in the moment, that maybe they regretted it afterward, that maybe somewhere beneath all the selfishness, they still loved me. But this had been planned, calculated. My mother suddenly grabbed my arm. Favor, please listen. I pulled away instantly. No, I said. My father's expression hardened when he realized sympathy wasn't working. We were struggling, he snapped. You think life was easy for us? We did what we had to do. I stared at him in disbelief. You abandoned a 13-year-old child. We raised you for 13 years, he shouted back. You owe us something. That sentence settled whatever confusion I had left inside me. Not once had they asked where I slept after they locked me out. Not once had they asked whether I was scared. Not once had they cared. I looked directly at my mother. When I begged outside that door, I asked quietly, did either of you care where I went? Neither of them answered. The silence felt heavier than the rain. Behind me, the warm lights of Leonard's estate glowed through the windows. The same home where someone unrelated to me had shown me more kindness in one day than my parents had shown me in years. I turned toward the property manager and nodded once. Thank you for telling me the truth. Then I faced my parents one final time. Leonard gave me a home when you took mine away, I said. And unlike you, I'm not leaving anyone completely helpless. I told security to arrange transportation to a local shelter and provide information for emergency housing services. But I made one thing absolutely clear. They are never to enter this property. My mother started crying again as the gates slowly began closing between us. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty watching them stand outside. Because 15 years earlier, I had stood in almost the exact same place, frightened, abandoned, unwanted. The difference was, I had been a child. I walked back toward the house Leonard saved me in and paused beside the framed scholarship letter hanging in my office hallway. The same letter that once made my parents see me as a burden. The same letter that accidentally led me to the man who became my real family. The night they locked me out, they thought my life was over. They never imagined it was the beginning.
Sometimes, the people who hurt you most still expect a place in your life later, and honestly, it's uncomfortable realizing how normal that probably sounds to some families, isn't it?